Okay, thank you everyone for coming. We have a lot of slides to cover, and I have to confess this was the most difficult presentation I've ever had to do because Portlet 3.0 is all on paper. So how can you give a demo? There's nothing to demo. How can you write code? The API is partially defined in different branches, and so I have attempted to create these slides with source code examples, but you know, it's not even close to vaporware, as this is all the way we think Portlet 3.0 is going to be working. Again, my name is Neil Griffin, and I'm the lead of the Liferay Faces project. I'm a contributing author to the JSF2 complete reference. And I represent the company on several different JSRs, the Java-related JSRs. There are other employees. I can think of Ray Ajax. He does the OSGI standards representation. James Faulkner does some Oasis standards representation. I tend to hang out on the JCP standards groups, and I represent the company on Portlet 3, which we're talking about today, Servlet 4, MVC 1.0, JSF 2.3, and also WSRP. And in my spare time, I like to sleep if I have any time. Needless to say, all this information that I'm going to present to you is information that you can glean from public mailing lists and publicly accessible web pages. So none of this is final, but we have made good progress on Portlet 3, and we welcome your feedback. Has anyone ever heard of the JCP before? Could I see a show of hands for people who have heard of the JCP? Okay, the JCP is the Java Community Process. It's a governance board that is set up to govern how the Java programming language is going to move forward, and also Java EE, Java ME, and so on. And different individuals and companies get together to try and improve the language and these different standards. Anyone can join. It's free if you join as an individual. Well, the standards we're focusing on right now is for Portlet. Portlet was first defined, the version 1 was first defined back in 2003. That was JSR 168. Who's been working with Portlet since JSR 168? Okay. And what we currently enjoy is Portlet 2.0, and that was in 2008. That was a very, very big release. And right now we're working on Portlet 3 under JSR 362. JSR stands for Java Specification Request. And a JSR doesn't necessarily become a standard. It has to be approved. The executive committee has to vote on these different JSRs before they actually become incorporated into the overall stack. The expert group was convened in March of 2013, so we've been working on this for a while. There's the link for the project page. I encourage you to sign up on the mailing list so that you can monitor what we're talking about. We have the meeting minutes from a weekly teleconference that are posted at this page right here. I have an RSS reader that's posted there, so when the chairman publishes the minutes, I'm notified and I can see. I can review what we all talked about to keep it fresh in my mind. And if you're interested in seeing what the API looks like and the changes from a Java doc perspective, there are some links right here. And I think the slides will be made available, so you'll be able to get access to these links conveniently. Again, we love feedback. We haven't gotten a lot of feedback from the community, and so what I'm showing you today, I hope you like. If you don't like it, if you hate it, we need to know, because we want to develop Portlet 3 in such a way that it's a pleasure to use and that it solves the problems that we intend for them to be solving. Portlet 3 is going to be targeting Java EE7, okay? And Java EE7 is kind of an umbrella term, and you can see all the different technologies that are incorporated in Java EE7. The real big ones that Portlet 3 is concerned with is Servlet 3, specifically 3.1, CDI 1.1, and also potentially WebSocket. Also, we'll be thinking very hard about JSF and what needs to happen. We're designing it in such a way to make sure that JSF and other frameworks, like Vaadin, for example, are going to be able to leverage the features in Portlet 3. The JSR committee is comprised of Liferay. It's chaired by IBM, and I was hoping that the chairman, Scott Nicholas of IBM, was actually going to join me on stage today. His office is just maybe 50 kilometers from here, but he had personal matters to attend to, wasn't able to join us. Vaadin also has a representative on the expert group. JBoss, there's some individuals as well, and of course Oracle. Java EE7 is something that is just starting to be adopted. It's over a year and a half old, but currently only Glassfish and Wildfly, to my knowledge, are supporting the full stack of what we call Java EE7. Oracle WebLogic still is not there. They have 12C or 12D, I'm not sure exact version number, and they've targeted parts of these, but not the entire full stack. And I don't think WebSphere is there yet either. But when Portlet 3 is done, we're hoping that Java EE7 will have gotten some wide adoption. One of the first things we're going to focus on in Portlet 3 is alignment with the servlet spec. There have been some nice features added to the servlet spec, and there are some Portlet-related counterparts that we can focus on. So what we're going to do is when your Portlet gets deployed, one of the features that is proposed is that the Portlet container will be scanning the class path for Portlet fragment.xml. So you might have a jar, or this might be in your war, but typically this would be in a jar. And this is analogous to web fragment.xml. Okay, so this helps with zero config and auto registration. So anything that you could put in Portlet.xml, you could also have in Portlet fragment.xml. Also, when the Portlet is deployed, the Portlet container Liferay's implementation would be scanning the class path for @Portlet and @Portlet filter annotations. And this is a way where you can, as the source code shows you right here, if you just annotate something that extends generic Portlet with an @Portlet annotation, then it would be auto-registered. And all the attributes that can be specified on the annotation are attributes that you would currently find in Portlet.xml. Also, another alignment with the servlet API would be file upload. Currently, if you were to unzip portlet.jar, anyone ever heard of portlet.jar before? Okay, if you were to unzip that, and if you were to look at any dependencies besides just the Java programming language, java.lang and so on, you would find one dependency on the servlet API, and that would be for cookie. We are thinking about adding one more dependency. In other words, we'll be referencing the part interface. And so the proposal is when someone does a multi-part form submission, then what would happen is in your process action, you would just be able to call action request.getParts. So no more will you have to deal with commons file upload for the Portlet factory variant of it and iterate through it all. Liferay will be providing all that for you. Okay, so we talked about alignment with the servlet API. Now we're going to talk about integration with CDI. Can I get a show of hands? Who's using CDI in their Portlets? Okay. All right. Who's using Spring? Okay, so we have about half the number of hands for CDI as we have for Spring. Of course, Spring was there first. Who's never heard of CDI before? Never heard of it. Okay. Well, CDI is going to be more and more part of these different standards within what we call Java EE. We're now finding CDI in JSF. You see that with the flow scoped annotation. Flow scoped is handled by CDI. We see it already in Ajax RS, and so CDI is being adopted throughout the Java EE platform. Now, I keep talking about Java EE. Although portlets are a standard, portlets are not part of Java EE. They are a server-side Java technology, but they're not part of Java EE. So we're in an interesting position where we need to integrate with these other standards, but technically, and if you're going to have a Java EE application server like JBoss or Glassfish, you don't need to have a Portlet container in there to be a full stack server. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to define two new scoped annotations. One is called Portlet Session Scoped, and actually we got a contribution for this already in the Liferay forums. There was someone using the Portlet session with a JSF portlet, and they contributed the code for a Portlet Session Scoped annotation. So I brought this to the attention of the chairman of the Portlet expert group, and he was pretty excited about it. And so as you can see here, what would happen is if you had a bean, just a Java Pojo, and you annotate it with Portlet Session Scope, then CDI would be in control of when this thing gets instantiated, what needs to be injected into it. And here you can see I have, on the left-hand side, there's just a simple Pojo of applicant, and that would be injected into this Portlet session bean at the time of construction. And you can see I have some comments in there about when the pre-destroy and post-construct annotated methods would be called. If you have @named also as an annotation, that means that the EL resolver that can be either in a JSP page or in a facelet view would be able to resolve this bean so that you can use it within EL. Also, we're going to do Portlet Lifecycle Scoped, and I'm really excited about this one. This is going to really clean up a lot of the software that we develop. What this does is the duration, so if you have a bean annotated with Portlet Lifecycle Scope, what that means is it will get created potentially in the action phase and survive all the way through to the render phase. Now, the way Liferay is designed is when you do an action, when you do a post, that's a full-page post back. It actually takes place within all one request. In other words, the post happens and you get your response that comes back. If you look at Portlet containers like Pluto and some other portals, they do a post redirect get. So that makes it a little bit more challenging for those types of products to actually support this, because the data has to survive two different requests, right? The first is a post and the successive one is a get. This is going to be a little bit easier for Liferay to implement because we just have one request under the hood. And you can see here that the post construct would get called immediately before this bean gets injected or when it gets encountered in the EL. CDI is in full control of that, but again, it would get created in the action phase and survive all the way through to the render phase. We also have a potential opportunity to do things like, who would like to see this one? I would love to see this one, okay? I just had a conversation in the forums with a developer in Germany who is very excited about being able to inject Liferay dependencies like theme display. All right, let's confess, who's done a portlet request get attribute for web keys theme display and cast it to a theme? Yeah, okay, so you won't have to do that anymore if we do something like this, but it's an opportunity for us to do things like this. Okay, so here's here's a JSP. And I'm just trying to show how you could use EL to reference these beans. So the first one highlighted, you see Portlet Lifecycle bean.applicant.fullname. This is just for a text box, right, where we're trying to populate the text box with the value of get full name. That would be on the initial render. And similarly for the email address, it would be Portlet Lifecycle bean.applicant.email address. Before I show you that code, first I want to talk about another feature we're adding in Portlet 3 called explicit Portlet State. Now the problem with what we call Portlet State is that in the API, it's there, but in the API it's kind of implied. And it's kind of fuzzy, it's more, it's not really clear as to what we mean by Portlet State. So in Portlet 3, we're getting very explicit. There's going to be a new interface called Portlet State that's going to be introduced at the top, and you can see Portlet request, base URL, and mutable Portlet State will all extend this interface. Currently, I think Portlet request does not have any super interfaces. So, and I think that's also the same with base URL. And so that we're going to have three methods on there. What we mean by Portlet State is get Portlet mode, render parameters, and window state. Those three things together describe the state of a portlet. And so we did some analysis, and what we found is that, we had portlet requests, and, they were giving us access to Portlet State. There was Portlet State that was on portlet URLs, action URLs, resource URLs, and so on. But then also for state-aware response, which would be action response and event response, also were giving us this Portlet State. So we kind of collected this up into the Portlet State interface. What's interesting for mutable Portlet State, the get render parameters method will return something that where you can change. Okay, so this is one where I don't know how you all are going to respond. I'm pretty excited about it, but when I first saw this, I was like, no, this is bad. This is bad. Everybody see that deprecated annotation right there? How do you feel about that? Whose initial reaction is, oh, that's bad? Okay, that was my initial reaction. But then when I saw what we were doing with the API, I've changed my mind. I kind of like it. So portlet request.get parameter is going to be deprecated. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to try and clearly make it understood what is an action parameter, what is a render parameter, and what is a resource parameter. And so we have action request, render request, and resource request. These all extend portlet request. On action request, you're going to have a new method there called get action parameters. Similarly, on render request, well, that inherits get render parameters from Portlet State. And resource request will provide a get resource parameters. Resource sharing, okay. This is an example here of two portlets on the same page. They're in two different wars, and they both need a JavaScript resource. I've tried to highlight it in bold here, called jsf.js. So even though this resource is in two different wars, the contents of jsf.js is exactly the same. And so this is a common problem where you have two or more portlets on the page, and they're pulling, if you were to diff the resources, they're exactly the same, but they're from different URLs. And so what we're trying to do is build a facility into Portlet 3 that will let you, the Portlet developer, decide whether or not a resource that's been provided by another portlet is the same as what you're trying to provide, and then it will only be included once in the head section of the portal page. Okay, this is a tough one. We really haven't discussed this at length, aside from the fact that we would like to support WebSocket, and our preliminary research indicates that if we're going to have a WebSocket endpoint, and if you're going to extend this endpoint class and you're going to provide an on-open method, the session, this is not Portlet session, it's not HTTP session, this is a WebSocket session. We might need some type of Portlet implementation of that, okay? But this is all just preliminary research. Portlet Hub and Ajax IPC. This was one of the hardest design challenges that we've faced so far with Portlet 3. The Portlet Hub and Ajax IPC. And it all has to do with this new resource we're introducing called Portlet.js. This is something that each vendor would have to, so it's not like Portlet.jar, where it's something that works in all different portal products. This is something where the functions are clearly defined as to what functions we need to support, but Liferay is in full control of the contents of this resource as to what's in it. So in this picture here, I've got three portlets on the page, Portlet A, B, and C. And they're all talking, just using JavaScript function calls to the Portlet Hub. And the Portlet Hub, in general, wants to be kind of the policeman or the traffic cop as to what's going on from a client-side JavaScript perspective. And so it has built-in facilities for creating an Ajax, an XML HTTP request, and processing responses and things like that. But let's talk about it in more detail. The responsibilities of the Portlet Hub it's primarily responsible for managing what we call Portlet State. Now, I need to make a distinction between Portlet State and Portlet Application State, okay? A Portlet State is the state of an individual portlet. Portlet Application State has to do with the state of 2 or more portlets on a page. As you know, if you're going to deploy a portlet, you can have a single war that has many portlets in it, okay? These portlets collectively are called a portlet application. So the Portlet Hub is responsible for managing Portlet State for all of the registered portlets that are on the page. And what we mean by Portlet State is what we discussed earlier. It's the portlet mode, the public and the private render parameters, and the window state. Again, the JavaScript implementation is going to be vendor specific, and also the communication channel as to what are we submitting and what comes back is also vendor specific. So there are no strict requirements as to how that stuff is done. So here's some JavaScript, and again, I may have made a typo in here. I didn't see any errors in my IDE and things like that. So Liferay has a JavaScript API where you can register for a ready event. And so what I tried to do is to show, if I'm developing a portlet for Portlet 3 and I want to participate with what the Portlet Hub can do, let's say I want to do Ajax IPC or something like that, then I'm going to need to register my portlet. And so this would be a way I can do it. Okay, Liferay is going to call this function when my portlet is ready, and then you can see I'm going to save what I call the Portlet Hub. So I call portlet.register, and I pass in my portlet ID, and I need to save that off. That's my Portlet Hub. And then I also need to save the initial state of my portlet. That's going to give me my public render parameters, my private render parameters, my portlet mode, and so on. And then I'm going to add an event listener. It's basically a callback when my state has changed. Okay, so this is what the Portlet State would look like. If we were going to have a JSON representation of it, we'd have the portlet mode, view, and we have view mode, edit mode, help mode, and so on. The window state might be normal or maximized or minimized, and then maybe we have a public render parameter or a private parameter, and they might have 1 or more values for a parameter. Also, there's, if I just go back one, you can see on the signature of this function, there's a render data right there. That's something that we're kind of playing around with right now, and it might look something like this. It might have some response text and also an indicator as to what the content type is. Okay. This was an analogy that was communicated to me by the chairman of the expert group, Scott Nicholas of IBM, and I thought it was a terrific analogy. There are 2 forms of IPC that we have in Portlet 2. One is public render parameters, the other is events. And they're both forms of IPC. If you change a public render parameter, I thought this was a terrific example. It's analogous to rotating a Rubik's Cube, okay? So the state hasn't changed. We're just kind of looking at it from a different direction, okay? That's kind of the idea of a public render parameter. It does not cause an application state change. We're just kind of looking at the data in a different way. And so if we change a public render parameter using the JavaScript API, the on-state change callback is going to get called for each portlet that has been registered on the page. And this is an example of some JavaScript that you would write in order to make this work. Okay, you'd have to implement, so let's start at the bottom. There's a button. It's just an HTML button. And when I click on the button, it says do action. So I go up to my do action function, and I'm changing the value of a public render parameter. It's just new value 1. And then I say, hey, Portlet Hub, I've changed my Portlet State. And so that's going to inform, it's going to invoke my on-state change callback. And at that point, I can, just use jQuery or whatever to or my favorite JavaScript library to just do an XML HTTP request, execute the resource phase, and then when it comes back, the DOM gets updated. So that's pretty easy. Okay. So that's changing a public render parameter. And again, that's just, kind of changing the view of my data. All right, an event is different. An event is quite different. An event, the intent of an event is to actually change the portlet application state. So it's analogous to actually twisting the Rubik's Cube and actually changing the state of my application. And so I'm going to show you a source code example of changing a private render parameter and then sending a server-side event to kind of change the face of this puzzle, so to speak. That would look like this. Okay, so again, we start at the bottom, we click on the button, and we go up to the do action function. There, I'm going to change the value of a private parameter, okay? And then I'm going to call Portlet Hub.action. Okay, I'm not going to use jQuery or something like that. I'm going to call Portlet Hub.action. That's going to create an Ajax, an XML HTTP request that will execute only the action and the event phase. There is no render data necessarily that comes back. Then each portlet on the page that's registered has an opportunity to do a resource request in order to get a DOM update back. Okay. Now this is very, very chatty, right? You can imagine if you have several portlets on a page, then you've got one Ajax request for changing the state and sending events and so on, and then you've got another Ajax request for each portlet, and you might see some flashing and stuff like that. Well, this is kind of a more basic use case, and so Liferay pushed very hard for framework support so that frameworks like JSF or perhaps Vaadin would be able to get some markup back just with one request. Okay, so if we're going to do that, then we're going to call Portlet Hub that start partial action. I won't bore you with the details of it. There's lots and lots of documentation online, but just suffice it to say, frameworks need to get markup back immediately. They can't wait for a subsequent Ajax request. Okay, by the way, we're trying to make WSRP work with all this as well. And so we're thinking hard about WSRP with diagrams like that. Okay, this is a state diagram that I had to come up with that would show how consumers talk to producers, which talk to things like the JSF Portlet bridge on a producer side, and how does all that stuff come back, and how do we interface with Portlet.js. So anyway, I won't make you look at that slide anymore. So that's the end of Portlet 3. I've got about 2 minutes left. I just want to talk about how Liferay is also helping to define Java EE8. We're helping with Servlet 4, and one of the big new features in Servlet 4 is HTTP 2. So we're keeping a close eye on that and how we can leverage that within Liferay. We're also helping with MVC 1.0, and this is a little bit of a controversial JSR. And there have been some blogs out there about, well, why do we need another MVC? You know, we already have Spring MVC, and this is, you know, kind of 10 years too late. There are some reasons why. Basically, Oracle had a survey, and developers said they wanted it. So that's one big reason, but I'll leave those links there for your reading pleasure. The M in MVC would be CDI. The V would be JSP, facelets, or, you know, some type of plugin like FreeMarker. And the controller is either going to be JAX-RS or a set of annotations that overlap with JAX-RS to some extent. We're still trying to figure this one out. One of the challenges is that with MVC applications, sometimes developers like to introduce stateful stuff on the server, you know, session scope beans and things like that. And REST proponents don't like state on the server and things like that, so there's some controversial things we need to talk about. Regardless, Liferay's goal is potentially to develop an MVC portlet bridge so that you can use this technology. And finally, JSR 372, which is JSF 2.3. We're going to have a dependency on Servlet 4 so that we can pre-populate the browser with resources that we know that the browser is going to request. We're going to have more CDI alignment, so you'll be able to do inject for faces context and things like that. Getting Ajax back from a CDI managed bean. And also, we're going to hopefully fix the JavaScript API in JSF so that it can be decorated, potentially have JSON renderers, and for portlets, we want all the parameters to be namespaced. So that's it. I'm out of time. Do you have time for any questions? Okay, one question. Okay.
One question. Oh, it was so
Does anyone
fast.
have any questions? And I'll be available afterwards if you have questions.
So thank you very much for a very informative and well, perfect presentation. So the question is, we've been hearing a lot about this Senate.js during the past 3 days.
Yes.
So from what I understand, a lot of this whole Ajaxified full Portlet lifecycle will soon be available in Liferay, way before this is finalized and Liferay is a compliant Portlet 3.0 container.
Right.
Will they be competing with each other, or can you?
No, they're not to be seen as competing, but complementary. And so we actually have design meetings coming up about this is what Portlet 3 is offering, and this is what single-page applications is offering. How do we make them work together? And so if Portlet 3 makes it into Liferay 7, then we will make sure that these two are complementary technologies, okay? If Portlet 3 does not make it into Liferay 7, say the Portlet 3 expert group takes too long or something like that, then we will make sure that what single-page application is for Liferay 7 will be compatible with Portlet 3.
Thank you.
So, sure. Okay, that's the only, all the time we have for questions, but I think we have a break right now, but I'm available afterwards. So thank you for coming.
All right.